There's a place in Nashville that keeps getting talked about. It's called the East Bank. Everybody seems to know that it's important. But outside of board meetings and government buildings, I don't think many people understand the scale of what's being talked about how much it will shape what Nashville becomes next. The East Bank is talked about like it's a blank canvas, but it's not. It's some of the most important land in Middle Tennessee. And for years, it's been locked up in asphalt. If you want to understand what Nashville is building now, you have to first understand how we got here. Because this is not just another development story. And this isn't just a football story. The stadium story you're about to hear, how the money works, who pays, what owners demand, and what cities trade away, this isn't some dead chapter from the 1990s. It's the operating system that cities are still building in. The reason I care about this story is the same reason I care about all the stories this podcast has told. Because decisions made in conference rooms and bond documents end up shaping where people can afford to live. They shape who gets to stay in a city when it decides to grow. Stadium economics, zoning policy, affordable housing commitments, they're all different issues with the same question. Who pays, who benefits, and what gets built? This is a story about Nashville making a bet on itself. What the bet got our city, what it cost, and what the city is now trying to build on the land that bet left behind. Because the East Bank story is not just about new buildings. It's about the difference between a city arriving and building a city worth living in once you get there. This is Loophole City, the stadium that changed a city. In the summer of 1995, two storms are building. One over Houston and one over Nashville. They don't look like storms at first. On one side is a football owner, a man who helped invent the modern NFL and is now watching the league he helped build leave him behind. On the other side is a mayor, trying to upgrade his city's entire operating system. The line that connects the two is a phone call. It lands on the desk of Nashville's mayor, Phil Bredesen. Not the kind you schedule, not the kind you see coming. The caller says that he represents a client who may be interested in his city. And then comes the part that strains belief. Would Nashville be interested in talking to an NFL team? Inside that office, the first reaction was laughter. Genuine, can't help it disbelief. Because in 1995, Nashville is still getting comfortable with the idea that it might someday be big league in anything other than country music. The NFL? Come on. And then they say yes anyways. Days later, the two storms cross in person. Nashville's leaders are sitting in a conference room in Chicago, chosen on neutral ground, sitting across from men who aren't laughing. One of them pulls out a legal pad and starts reading numbers like a weather report. Population, growth, television markets. Then he stops. He reaches into a bag and lays a map of the United States on the table, with dots where the NFL already lives, existing franchises. Then he takes a pen and draws a big circle around the eastern half of the United States. And right in the middle is empty space. And in the middle of that space is Nashville. The city starts looking like possibility. And once Nashville sees itself that way, the question changes. It's no longer, do we want a football team? It becomes, what would Nashville pay to stop being empty space? I want you to hold on to that question, because we're going to spend the next 3 episodes answering it. The first episode follows those two storms into that conference room in Chicago. Episode 2 is about what Nashville actually signed. The fine print, and a clause that committed the city to something it couldn't fully see from the table. Episode 3 is about right now. The East Bank. The new stadium going up across the river, and whether Nashville is finally looking at growth differently. But we start here, in Chicago, with a map, a circle, and a city being told that it's empty space. We start in 1960. The National Football League has a monopoly on professional football, and a group of businessmen decide to challenge it. To compete, they form the American Football League, known as the AFL. 8 teams, a rival league, and most of the sports establishment telling them it will never work. One of those founding members is an oil man from Houston named Bud Adams. His full name is Kenneth Stanley Adams Jr., but nobody calls him that. He's Bud. He comes from oil money and builds a wildcatting firm on his own. He's one of the men who co-founded the AFL, alongside Lamar Hunt. Critics mock the group as the Foolish Club, because the assumption is simple. Nobody challenges the NFL and survives. And they are wrong. The AFL drives up player salaries, forces the game onto more television sets, and becomes real enough to force a merger with the National Football League. That merger creates the modern NFL, the most popular sport in America. In other words, the modern NFL doesn't happen without men like Bud Adams. He owns the Houston Oilers. They win the AFL's first 2 championships, back-to-back, in 1960 and 1961. Bud Adams wasn't some late-arriving owner. He was there at the creation. And the city he built his legacy in, Houston, Texas, treated him accordingly for a very long time. In 1965, Houston opens a stadium that genuinely feels like the future. It's the world's first fully enclosed, air-conditioned, dome sports stadium. People call it the 8th wonder of the world. And at the time, that didn't really sound crazy. The driving force was Judge Roy Hofheinz, the owner of the Houston Astros, a former Houston mayor, and a man who reportedly slept in the stadium while it was being built because he was so consumed by the project. Bud's Houston Oilers anchor the building as a tenant in 1968. The Astrodome hosts football, baseball, rodeos, concerts, everything under one roof. And for a long time, it works. Bud has a home, the NFL is growing, television money is rising, a big, iconic, multi-purpose building looks like an asset. This is the era where Bud looks entrenched. He helped build the sport, he helped build the league, his team plays in a building that looks like tomorrow. And then time passes. Not a year or 2. Decades. By the early 1990s, the NFL is not the same business that it was when the Dome opened. The building that once looked like the future is starting to feel like the past. Then comes the turning point. 1993. With free agency. Legal battles between teams and players crack open the old labor structure, and suddenly players can move across teams in a real market. The only response is for the league owners to issue a salary cap, a way to keep payrolls from exploding. And here's what the bargain actually does. A huge portion of NFL money comes from television contracts, split evenly amongst all teams. That's the base. What separates teams is what they earn on top of it. Local revenue. Tickets, suites, naming rights, parking, concessions. The money doesn't get split evenly there. It stays at home. So the TV deals set the salary cap, and local money decides who gets to live on the edge of it. And the easiest way to generate more local money without changing anything about the sport itself is to change where you play. That flipped the football stadium from a place where the games happen into the machine that creates the revenue you need to compete for talent. So in the 1990s, stadiums stopped being civic monuments and start being engineered as revenue systems. The stadiums put in luxury suites, club seats, naming rights deals, inventory you can sell to corporations that don't really care who win on Sunday as long as their logo's in the right spot. In this new NFL era, 2 teams can live under the same salary cap and operate in totally different economic classes. One team can absorb mistakes, while the other has to play scared. And that's the arms race that begins to form. Teams have to build stadiums that allow them to compete. And here's the part that matters for our story. Most of this arms race was publicly financed. Cities and owners slowly normalize a structure where public bonds and dedicated revenue streams covered most of the cost of constructing these machines. So the competition stops being between teams, and it becomes a buy-in test for cities. Which cities will pay to keep up? And this is where Bud Adams' problem comes into focus. Because by the late 1980s, Bud senses where the league is headed. He's lived through the AFL war, the merger, the rise in TV money. He can see where this is going. So he starts pushing Houston for upgrades to the Astrodome. More suites, more amenities, more premium inventory. He's trying to force a multi-purpose dome built for baseball and rodeos into acting like a modern NFL football stadium. Houston responds. In 1987, Harris County commissioners approve a renovation package, adding 10,000 seats and installing 66 luxury suites. The cost is $67 million in public money. Harris County spends $67 million to modernize their stadium, and specifically to persuade Bud Adams to keep his team in Houston. But those renovations buy Houston time, not loyalty. Because here's what $67 million doesn't buy you. A brand new stadium. The Astrodome footprint is the same. The multi-purpose logic is the same. The constraints are still baked in. By the early 1990s, even the new luxury suites aren't enough anymore. The league has moved. New stadiums are being built from scratch, and the standard keeps rising. Bud goes back to Houston again with a new ask. Not renovations this time, a new stadium. Football only, preferably downtown. He even signals he'll put up part of the cost himself. Houston's response after spending $67 million? No. You can understand the fatigue. From Houston's perspective, they just did this. They spent $67 million, and Bud's still not satisfied. When does this end? But from Bud's perspective, that's exactly the wrong question. The question isn't whether he's satisfied. The question is whether Houston can compete. And his answer is simple. Not with this building. A Harris County commissioner was later asked whether the $67 million renovation looked like a bad investment in retrospect. His response? Hell yeah. By 1993, Bud has made his move publicly. He's asked for a new stadium, and Houston has said no. And while he's stuck in the corner, the NFL moves fast. St. Louis builds a dome to lure the Rams. Jacksonville builds new for expansion. Charlotte finances a new stadium to enter the league. The details differ from city to city, but the pattern doesn't. Public money becomes the admission ticket. So Bud stops negotiating with Houston. And he starts looking for somewhere else. Nashville doesn't call Bud. Bud goes looking for a city hungry enough to say yes. Now let's turn to Nashville. Before Bud Adams ever points his compass toward Tennessee, Nashville's already moving. Not in a we've arrived way. In a we've decided to become something different way. And it started with Phil Bredesen. Bredesen takes office as mayor in 1991. And the first thing you need to understand about him is that he's not from here. He grew up in New York. He went to Harvard on scholarship. He went into healthcare. And in 1975, him and his wife moved to Nashville. He founded a healthcare management company, grew it to 6,000 employees, and sold it in 1986. He arrives in office in 1991 with the mindset of someone who believes cities can be built on purpose. Bredesen sees the city the way an outsider does, which means he sees it clearly. By the time he takes office, he has a mindset of a pragmatic capitalist and the patience of someone who has built things from scratch. As mayor, he has a word for what he wants to build. He calls it civic furniture. To him, a city's character is shaped by the physical things it constructs. Parks, plazas, libraries, arenas, greenways. The bones and the connective tissue that change how people move through public space and feel about where they live. He's not a keep a lights on mayor. He's a change what the city is mayor. And his logic is simple. If you want a city to grow, you don't chase growth. You build the conditions that make growth inevitable. You build civic furniture. So here's the Nashville that Bredesen inherits in 1991, because you need to feel the gap between the city that exists and the city he thinks might be possible. On paper, the city works. The budget's mostly balanced, services mostly function. But downtown is a gap. Lower Broadway, the strip that today is packed wall to wall until 3 a.m. with tourists and music, is struggling. Half empty, neon lit, but hollow. The Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, has been sitting vacant since 1974. Essentially a shuttered relic in the middle of downtown. The library system is embarrassing for a city of Nashville's size. Just over 1/3 of Nashvillians have active library cards. The city has good bones. Healthcare, universities, the music industry, the geographic position of a state capital in the middle of the country. But the physical center of Nashville doesn't reflect any of it. The city feels in its marrow, like a place that's been treading water and it's telling itself it's okay. Bredesen arrives and immediately starts asking, what would it actually take to stop treading water? Before Bud Adams ever calls, Nashville's already rehearsing a bigger version of itself. And you can see it in what Phil Bredesen starts building. Not just in abstract, in concrete, steel, public money, real bets. And it starts with the arena. Because this is the clearest window into how Bredesen thinks. When he starts pushing for a downtown arena, Nashville doesn't have a hockey team. But he doesn't wait for one. His logic is deliberate and a little audacious. Build it first. Get the tenant later. Think about what he's asking for. Public money, real public money, for a major downtown building with no confirmed tenant, no signed lease, no guarantee that a professional franchise is actually coming. That is not a cautious pitch. That is a mayor betting his credibility on an empty building. And the pushback is real. Council members want proof first, a tenant first, some concrete assurance that they can take back to their constituents and say, this is what we're buying and this is what it's for. But Bredesen's answer is basically, the building is the commitment. The city is the tenant. We are going to build the stage first and trust that the right act will follow. The council eventually votes yes, and construction begins. And in 1997, Nashville is granted an NHL expansion franchise. The Predators begin play in 1998 in a building that is already waiting for them. Arena first, team second. And that sequencing matters because it tells you something essential about the Nashville storm that is building before the NFL is ever in the picture. Bredesen doesn't wait for permission from the market. He creates the conditions and trusts that the right things will follow. Nashville is starting to act like it belongs before it has proof that it does. And once a city starts thinking that way, other things begin to move too. Downtown, for one, starts waking up. Bredesen doesn't own the Ryman. He doesn't personally bring it back to life. But he helps create this kind of civic climate where bringing it back starts to make sense. In 1993, Gaylord Entertainment commits $8 million to restore it. The building that's been sitting dark for 17 years reopens in 1994. And once it comes back, something bigger starts coming back with it. The idea that downtown Nashville can matter again. Lower Broadway begins to stir. The entertainment district that Nashville's tourism economy now rests on gets its rebirth in these years. That matters because this is not just about one building reopening. It's about a city beginning to believe that its center can be activated, that decline is not permanent, that downtown can once again become a place people choose to be. And Bredesen's not only thinking about entertainment, he's thinking about civic life more broadly. He proposes a $115 million overhaul for the library system, not one building, a full civic reinvestment. Think about that number. Because when we start moving towards the details of the stadium deal, it reminds you that Nashville knows how to spend big on public things. The real question is not whether the city can invest. The question is what we choose to invest in, and on whose terms. He's also thinking about land differently, especially land on the river. During the Bredesen years, Nashville expands its park system, including Shelby Bottoms, along the Cumberland on the east side of the city. And pause there for a second. Because that means before the stadium fight ever begins, Bredesen is already treating that side of the river as civic ground, as public space worth shaping, worth protecting, worth imagining. It sits right next to the area that will later become the East Bank, the same side of the river. So by the mid-1990s, this is what Nashville looks like. A city willing to build before it has all the answers. A city willing to spend public money to reshape its image. A city bringing downtown back to life. A city investing in civic identity, in public space, in the physical stage on which a bigger version of itself might exist. That's the storm that Bud Adams sees. Not a finished city. Not a proven city. A hungry one. And maybe that's even more powerful. Because when Bud starts looking for a new home, he's not just looking for size. He's looking for belief. And by then, Nashville has plenty of it. Which is exactly how you end up in a conference room in Chicago. In August of 1995, before most of Nashville even knows the negotiations are underway, Bud Adams writes a letter to Phil Bredesen. It has a Houston Oilers letterhead, an oil derrick logo, the team name in bold. And what the letter establishes is something simple: exclusivity. From August 11th to October 20th of 1995, Nashville and the Houston Oilers agree to negotiate exclusively with each other. Nashville can't talk to any other NFL team. The Oilers cannot negotiate with Houston, Memphis, or any other market. For 70 days, there is only Nashville. The letter is signed K.S. Bud Adams Jr., President, Houston Oilers. Now here's what the document actually represents beneath the formal legal language. Bud Adams is locking Houston out. He has tried for years to get Houston to build what he needs. He's been told no. He's watched the league move around him. He's forced Houston to spend $67 million on renovations that didn't close the gap. And now he's signing a document that says, for the next 70 days, I'm exclusively Nashville's. That's not leverage for Nashville. That's simply the absence of Houston. And the storm has left Texas. 10 weeks later, Bredesen writes back. October 4th, 1995. Subject line, letter agreement. And it opens with 2 words. Dear Bud. Not Dear Mr. Adams. Not Dear Chairman Adams. Dear Bud. Now you can overread a salutation, but I don't think this one's accidental. Phil Bredesen is a Harvard-educated businessman, built and sold a 6,000-person company. He thinks in systems and long horizons. When he opens a formal legal agreement, a document that will be signed by both parties and submitted to Metro Council for approval, with Dear Bud, that's a deliberate choice. Dear Bud is the language of a city trying to make this feel like a relationship, not just a transaction. That is reaching towards something it hasn't been before. The letter goes on to outline what Nashville's willing to build. Attached to it is a specification sheet. I'm going to walk you through it. Not because the details are complicated, but because one of them is going to matter for the next 25 years in ways nobody in that room could see yet. The stadium will sit on the east bank of the Cumberland River. The site, approximately 105 acres. The building, at least 65,000 permanent seats, a minimum of 100 enclosed suites, 10,700 club seats. And right there in the specs, the stadium shall be, quote, a state-of-the-art, modern, first-class football stadium, end quote. Stop on that phrase for a second. First class. It doesn't appear in the 1996 lease, not in some later amendment. Right here, in the letter agreement, in the first document both men sign. Nashville is agreeing to maintain whatever first class means in 1996, or in 2006, or in 2026. At whatever cost the evolving NFL requires, already in writing. That phrase will follow Nashville for decades. But we'll get there, because there's one more item in the specs. And it's the one detail that shapes the site most dramatically. Buried in the requirement for a TSU locker room and a note about ADA compliance is item G. 11 words. Parking spaces for a minimum of 7,500 vehicles will be located on site. 7,500 parking spaces on site. A hard contractual floor. Picture that in physical terms. Picture every person in a sold-out Nissan stadium. Now picture their cars parked bumper to bumper, row after row, stretching in every direction. That's what 7,500 spaces looks like. From above, it reads like a neighborhood-sized piece of land. But it's all parking. Just asphalt and the cars that show up 8 Sundays a year. And that's before you count the lanes, the circulation, the space that you need to make all of that parking actually work. On an 105-acre site that also has to contain a 65,000-person stadium, you are committing an enormous percentage of that land to asphalt. Before a single architect has drawn a plan, before anyone has asked what else might go there. Nashville citizens haven't voted yet. The stadium funding hasn't been invented yet. The bonds haven't been issued. And already on page 2 of this letter agreement, a huge piece of the East Bank has been programmed before the public fight even starts. The parking lots that will surround the stadium for 25 years will keep one of the city's most valuable pieces of real estate tied up in parking lots, while Nashville becomes one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Those lots are not an accident of later planning. Not a failure of imagination that crept somewhere down the line. They are item G. The letter closes. We look forward to continuing our relationship for the good of our community. Warmest regards, Philip Bredesen. And the East Bank's future was being set in writing before most Nashvillians had any idea what that would mean. Read together, the letters tell a pretty uncomfortable story. Bud Adams needed Nashville at least as much as Nashville needed Bud. Bud's been told no by Houston for years. He was watching other cities get publicly financed modern stadiums while he argued over renovations in a dome the league had already passed by. He was not negotiating from strength, but he didn't act like it. And Nashville, still the city that laughed when someone first suggested an NFL team, never figured out how to make him. And everything that follows, the stadium funding, the first class clause, the 43-year lease, the parking lots baked into the original specs, follow directly from that gap. November 16th, 1995, at the Davidson County Courthouse, Bud Adams and Phil Bredesen signed the formal agreement. Bud presents Bredesen with a personalized Oilers jersey. Adams grins and shouts, "Are y'all ready for some football?" The place erupts. And then Adams says something worth sitting with. Quote, "The Oilers didn't seem to be the right name for Tennessee, unless someone knows a place around here where some oil might be coming out of the ground. This is going to be Tennessee's team." End quote. Tennessee's team, not Nashville's team. The identity that Nashville is paying for, the big league badge it is about to spend $292 million for, is being shared with the entire state at the moment of signing. Right there at the closing ceremony, Bud Adams is still setting the terms. Let's go back to the conference room in Chicago. The map on the table, the pen, the circle. Nashville is the missing piece. But that moment is not really a discovery. Nashville didn't suddenly become something it wasn't. The city was already moving. Bredesen was laying his civic furniture. Downtown was waking up. Bridgestone Arena was under construction. Nashville was already rehearsing a bigger version of itself. What changed is that someone with power looked at a map and decided that Nashville was useful. Not because Nashville had leverage, because Nashville had hunger. A mayor rebuilding a city piece by piece. A population tired of being told that it wasn't big league. A political class willing to put real public money on the table to stop being empty space. Bud Adams found exactly the partner he needed. And Nashville found exactly the validation it was hoping for. But before the city fully understood the bill, part of the cost had already been written into the land. The parking, the obligations, the shape of the East Bank itself. In the next episode, we're going to look at what Nashville actually signed. The money, the fine print, the moving target promise hidden inside the words first class. We're going to climb into an imaginary helicopter and look at the deal the way cities look at projects like this, from 10,000 feet. Then we come back to the ground and look at what you can't see from up there. This is Loophole City, a stadium that changed a city.